Hello, welcome everyone to our gathering, the Peace Summit before the NATO Summit. We were planning to have this meeting in Ankara on site.
Sezgin mikrofonun kapandı.
As we are here at the moment. So thank you everyone for coming over. Unfortunately, we are going through a government repression in Turkey, so we had to postpone a part of our peace meeting that we were planning to have in Ankara. So we are having this online event today, 2 days before the NATO summit that will take place in Ankara. So we have participants from various parts of the world who came here to support us. We will start for the first session. We will have Sean Connor's video. Unfortunately, Sean Connor couldn't join us due to his travel, but he sent a video of his recording for this meeting. We have Anna from Global Energy Embargo for Palestine. And we have Deborah with us, Deborah Burton from Tipping Point North South. So before starting the first session, I would like to welcome Egehan to give a short introduction to the meeting, why we are here, and what is the current situation in Turkey, and what is going on about NATO, and more about the People's Climate Summit. Then we will begin the first session. Thank you for everyone coming over, and Egehan, we are with you.
Herkese merhabalar. Hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Bu toplantıyı Sezgin'in de dediği gibi yüz yüze yapmayı dilerdik. Fakat NATO zirvesi nedeniyle bir tür olağanüstü koşullar söz konusu Ankara'da. Ankara'da sokağa çıkmanın bile tehlikeli hale getirildiği bir durumda yaşamaya çalışıyoruz. Ben de Ankara'dayım bu arada. Sokak hayvanları toplatıldı. İşte gecekonduların önüne perdeler çekildi. Çok ciddi bir yatırım yapıldı. 12 milyar dolar civarında bir yatırım yapıldığı söyleniyor NATO zirvesi için. Trump'ın uçağına özel pist yapıldı, yeni bir havaalanı açıldı, daha doğrusu askeri bir havaalanı sivilleştirildi vesaire gibi çok büyük bir yatırım söz konusu. Türkiye'nin de bundan beklentisi ne diye bakacak olursak işte daha fazla F-35, işte Avrupa'yla savunma sanayi ilişkilerinin geliştirilmesi, son 3 yıldır arda Türkiye'nin İHA satışında lider konumunda olduğunu biliyoruz, Türkiye'li şirketlerin. Onların güçlerini pekiştirmek ve bu 12 milyar dolardan daha fazla kar elde etmek. Şimdi bu sadece NATO böyle bir ortamda yapılıyor, NATO zirvesi. İşte yarın ve öbür gün 7-8 Temmuz'da dünya liderleri Türkiye'de olacaklar ama zirve 28 Haziran'da başladı. Bir savunma sanayi boyutu var. Yani savunma pazarı diyeyim artık ona. Savunma sanayinin bir pazara çıktığı, görücüye çıktığı bir zirve bu aynı zamanda. Ve esas olarak da bir tür dayanışma vesaire örgütü ne zaman oldu NATO bilmiyorum. Herhalde tarihinde hiç olmadı ama güvenlikçi zihniyetin çok ağır bastığı, çok daha yaygın bir kabul gördüğü bir ortam, bir tarihsel dönemde yapılıyor bu zirve. Genel olarak bütün rejimlerin militarleştiğini görüyoruz. Zaten dünyada toplumların da militarleştirildiğini aynı zamanda tanıklık ediyoruz. Ama bu NATO zirvesinde esas olarak gayri safi yurt içi hasılaların %5'ini savunmaya ayırmak diye bir gündem konuşuluyor olacak. Şu anda Türkiye'nin savunma gayri safi yurt içi hasılası içinde savunmanın payı 1,9. Eğitimin payı 4,9, sağlığın payı 4,9. Yani 5 civarında eğitim ve sağlık gibi kocaman alanlar gayri safi yurt içi hasılanın %5'iyle yürüyor. Ve bunun karşısında savunmanın 1,9 olan yüzdelik payını 5'e çıkarmak gibi bir gayret içinde olacak. Sadece Türkiye değil, bütün ülkeler. Bu ne anlama gelecek bizler için? Esas olarak eğitim, sağlık, barınma gibi alanlarda ayrılan bütçenin düşmesi ve bunların savunma sanayine aktarılması anlamına gelecek. Yani bizim hayatlarımızda somut karşılığını halihazırda görmeye başladığımız askerileşme yoğunlaşarak devam edecek önümüzdeki dönemde. Sadece Türkiye açısından değil, bütün dünya açısından bu aşağı yukarı böyle olacak. Güvenlikçi bir zihniyetin egemen olduğu ve bize herhangi bir yararı olmayan toplumlara, halklara, dünya üzerinde yaşayan canlılara herhangi bir yararı olmayan, yarardan çok zararı olan, özellikle ekolojik kriz anlamında onu da derinleştirecek diğer her şeyle birlikte bir sürecin içinden geçiyoruz. Şimdi bu toplantıyı yüz yüze yapsaydık Türkiye'de olmasının ayrı bir anlamı da olurdu bizim için. Çünkü biz Türkiye işte hep böyle jeopolitik üstünlüğüyle vesaire övünülür ama esas olarak Gazze, Suriye, Kürt coğrafyası, Ukrayna gibi büyük bir ekokırım hattının, ekokırım çemberinin içinde bir ülke ve onun aktörlerinden bir tanesi. Ve savaşın bu ekokırım sürecini derinleştirdiğini de hep beraber gördük. Özellikle Gazze'de Birleşmiş Milletler Çevre Programı'nın değerlendirmeleri ağaç ürünlerinin, ağaçların yani %97'sinin ortadan kalktığını raporladı. Tarla ürünlerinin %82'sinden fazlasının ortadan kalktığını raporladı. Ukrayna'daki ölü sayısını bilmiyoruz. Çünkü iki tarafta söylemek istemiyor. Bir tür psikolojik egemenlik, üstünlük kurma gerekçesiyle. Ama 1 milyonun üzerinde, 1,5 milyona yakın insanın hayatını kaybettiğini biliyoruz. Ama bunun yanında işte Donbas'ta su basan madenlerin doğaya verdiği zarar, işte içme sularına karışma riski, bunun yaratacağı sağlık sorunları vesaire gibi çok daha büyük, çok daha büyük demeyeyim de büyük bir ekolojik sorunla da karşı karşıya kalmış durumdayız. Şimdi askeri emisyonlar dediğimiz şey zaten şu anda dünyadaki karbon emisyonlarının %5'inden fazlasını üretiyor. %5,5 civarında yanlış bilmiyorsam. Daha doğrusu Scientists for Global Responsibility grubunun bir çalışması %5,5 olduğunu söylüyor. Küresel askeri karbon ayak izinin. Ve hani Türkiye ölçeğinde baktığınızda bile askeri harcamaların, savunma sanayi harcamalarının 2 katı, 3 katı kadar arttırılması bunların askeri karbon ayak izinin de artacağı anlamına geliyor. Diğer taraftan da savaş ekonomisi, şu anda işte İran'a yönelik saldırı, Venezuela saldırısının ardından da İran'a yönelik saldırının gösterdiği gibi savaş ekonomisi zaten aşırı derecede fosil yakıt bağımlı bir ekonomi. Modern savaş makinesi petrolsüz çalışmıyor biliyorsunuz. İşte jet yakıtlar, zırhlı araçlar, askeri gemiler vesaire derken militarizmle fosil kapitalizmin aslında iç içe aynı sistemin iki farklı yüzü olduğunu görüyoruz. Bunun yanında da yeniden inşa meselelerinde de ciddi bir ekolojik yıkım söz konusu oluyor. Bugün Suriye'de yaşananlar örneğin ciddi bir inşaat sektörü, işte enkaz yönetimi, yeni altyapı ihaleleri, beton ve çimento aracılığıyla ekolojik bir mesele haline geldiğini savaş sonrası dönemin bile bize gösteriyor. Şimdi geçtiğimiz dönemde İklim Adaleti Koalisyonu olarak, İklim Adaleti Koalisyonu da Halkların İklim Zirvesi'nin bir parçası. Doğayla da Barış diye bir rapor hazırlamıştık. Bu raporda da esas olarak Türkiye'deki negatif barış sürecine ekolojik meselelerin de dahil edilmesi noktasındaki talebimizi ifade etmek için yaptığımız bir çalışmaydı. Uzunca bir rapordu. Bu raporda da temel olarak şunu çalışırken de görmüştük, göstermeye de çalışmıştık. Kürdistan'da yürütülen savaşın da esas olarak doğaya, biyoçeşitliliğe, işte güvenlik amaçlı ormansızlaştırma, güvenlik barajları vesaire gibi yöntemler aracılığıyla çok ciddi zararlar verdiğini tespit etmiştik. Ve bu zararların ortadan kaldırılması, durdurulması ve doğanın belirli oranlarda rehabilite etmesinin, ekolojik yollarla kendi kendini rehabilite etmesinin yollarının bulunması gerektiğini vurgulamıştık. Şu anda ama savaş meselesi hangi ülkede ne yaşanırsa yaşansın, yani negatif barış süreçleri vesaire de söz konusu olsa bile Savaş meselesi ekolojik yıkımın gittikçe hızlanması anlamına geliyor. Onarımda bile, yani savaş sonrası onarım sürecinde bile ekolojik yıkımın hızlandığı gerçeğiyle karşı karşıya kalıyoruz. Biz tam o yüzden Halkların İklim Zirvesi, Halklar Savaş Karşıtı Hareket ve Barış Kozası olarak NATO zirvesi döneminde bir barış buluşması yapmayı önemsedik. Ama esas olarak da barışın da fosil kapitalizmden kurtulmakla ilişkili bir mesele olduğu mantığından hareket ediyoruz. Şimdi bugün aslında çok farklı konuşmacılarla hem rejimlerin militarizasyonu sürecini gözden geçireceğiz diye umuyoruz. Hem de esas olarak savaş ve ekolojik yıkım ya da savaş sonrası e, yeniden inşa ve ekolojik yıkım konusunda çok şey duyacağız. Ve barışın esas olarak sadece insanlar ya da devletler arasında değil, doğa, toplum ve bütün türler arasında bir barış olması gerektiği sonucuna varacağız diye umuyorum. Daha da uzatmadan sözü tekrar Sezgin'e veriyorum.
Thank you very much, Ejahan, for pointing out the relationship between militarism and climate and how it is very related to the reason we are organizing here in Turkey. And also, like, militarism doesn't come without authoritarianism, as we are deeply experience here in Turkey. So yeah, with the increased pressure, and today, beginning since the beginning of this week, there has been not tens but hundreds of people have been detained in Turkey. So yeah, there's a government's preparation against the NATO summit. So starting with NATO in our first session, I would like to start with Sean Connor. As I mentioned, he sent a video to us. Unfortunately, he cannot participate the meeting in person. Sean Connor is working at the International Peace Bureau, and in his speech, he will give a brief look at the past and present of NATO, and it is titled NATO and the Common Security Against Military Pacts. Now I'm starting with sharing my screen. It's a 10-minute speech, then we will continue with the session. Now you are with Sean Connor. Sorry. Sorry, we'll take not this. No. Wait. Tamam.
We cannot hear the voice.
Sezgin şimdi çözecek anlaşılan. Sezgin
Ne oldu?
sesi duyurman lazım.
Ha. Sorry. Oradan mikrofonu açar mısın? Sorry. But how? Can you hear it now?
Hayır, duyamıyoruz henüz.
But I have no idea how to do it then, because my mic is open.
While you share, you have to allow the sound of the video. Zoom should ask you if you want to share the video's
Okay.
sound.
Sezgin, e, sen videoyu hazırlarken ya da bize gönder, Solfasole o hazırlasın sesi. Diğer konuşmacılarla devam edelim mi? Uygun mudur? Teknik meseleyi çözmek için. Başladı. Tamam, çok sağ ol.
Dear friends, we are all familiar with the history of NATO in the Cold War, but I will begin with a brief selection of some highlights from this long history. NATO formed in 1949, mere years after the end of the Second World War, at a point where the US was dominant in Western Europe, with the stated goal, in the words of its first Secretary General, Hastings Lionel Ismay, to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Purportedly, it was a defensive alliance against the Soviet Union, though at the time of its formation, no similar military alliance had yet existed in the Eastern Bloc. In its early days, and we may say even now, it also includes authoritarian and autocratic regimes with little distinction. During the Cold War, it became clear that NATO was a nuclear alliance, allowing for the stationing of nuclear weapons in Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, the UK, Italy, and Turkey, where they are either still stationed today or likely to return in the case of the UK. While direct confrontation with the Soviet Union never broke out, there were several close calls, in particular during the contentious 1970s and 1980s Euro missile crisis. Of course, the US had been and remains the only country to ever use nuclear weapons, which had primarily been used as a way to instill fear in the Soviet Union. At least during the Cold War, NATO did have the excuse of combating another large military alliance in the Warsaw Pact, even if the latter was only formed as a response to the NATO alliance and in particular its inclusion of West Germany. But as the Cold War came to an end and the Warsaw Pact disbanded, NATO continued on, despite losing its central premise for existence. We are of course familiar as well with the US Secretary of State James Baker's promise to Mikhail Gorbachev that there would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction even 1 inch to the east, which was quickly and then repeatedly broken. Today, NATO stands with no equals in terms of military force, power, and influence. It is responsible for over half of all global military expenditure, occupies 3 out of the 5 UN Permanent Security Council seats, and formally includes 6 out of the 7 members of the G7 countries, the most developed economies, who together have unmatched influence on the global economy. It has become an expert at writing its own history and in public relations, claiming to defend democracy, the rule of law, and peace, even as it has proven time and again to contradict its own stated values. Current NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte has, however, admitted the true purpose of NATO that harkens back to Ismay's comments at its founding. NATO is a platform for protecting American power. In the world today, one that is rapidly changing and where power is much more widely distributed than during the Cold War or post-Cold War Pax Americana, it is clear, however, that it is not just about projecting American power, but rather protecting and preserving Western military, economic, and hegemonic dominance. While the rest of the world is already quite aware of these developments, civil society in the West is unfortunately quite behind in understanding this reality and the reasons why European countries are so willing and ready to abandon their supposed morals, principles, and international law in favor of a project of militarism, even as European societies and social systems suffer directly and immediately as a result. What is particularly unfortunate about this development is that there was a time when European leaders, both from the Eastern and Western blocs during the Cold War, had found an alternative way forward, though it has been all but lost in recent decades. In response to the Euro missile crisis and the high tensions during the Cold War, the then Prime Minister of Sweden, Olof Palme, convened a group of political leaders in the Independent Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues, which in 1982 introduced to the world the concept of common security, arguing that no nation, state, or peoples can achieve security at the expense of another, or in other words, that attempts to make oneself safe at the expense of another results in less security for all. The arms race of the Cold War demonstrated this clearly. As NATO arms spending and militarization, including nuclear weapons production, rose, it did not actually guarantee the security to the citizens of NATO countries, as it only increased the tensions and threats from the Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union, and vice versa. The answer was clear. The only way to increase security was to create security with adversaries rather than against them. In practical terms, this meant arms control and reduction, in particular of nuclear weapons, delegitimizing war as a tool for resolving international or interstate disputes, fostering of diplomacy, dialogue, and trust building, and strengthening international institutions. Out of the 1980s and the common security concept came treaties like the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, or INF Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, which allowed for the surveillance of military facilities in enemy nations, and the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START Treaty. This also includes the process to the Helsinki Final Act, just over 50 years ago now, and the eventual formation of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. As the Cold War came to an end, the dynamic unfortunately shifted, and common security was all but forgotten, replaced by US and NATO dominance. Recognizing this reality, it may help us understand why the Pax Americana was really anything but peaceful, especially as we have seen now an explosion of wars, conflicts, and genocides in the past 3 decades. US and NATO wars and militarism have driven growing global inequality and insecurity that we now face. Today, the central principles of common security, mutual disarmament, including nuclear disarmament, diplomacy and dialogue, trust building and cooperation, and the importance of international institutions are all paying the price for US and NATO's hubris. There are nearly no arms treaties remaining, at least not bilaterally between major powers, and new weapons technologies such as drones, artificial intelligence, sonic weaponry, and hypersonic missiles all remain unregulated, with the potential for mass destruction in their use. We've already seen some cases, whether it's the use of drones to sustain a war of attrition in Ukraine, or the Israeli use of AI in identifying targets leading to mass civilian casualties and in the genocide in Gaza, or in the US missile strike on the Minab Girls' School in Iran, and the kidnapping of the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Consequences are severe, and we are only seeing the first uses. Meanwhile, dialogue and diplomacy to resolve conflicts has nearly completely disappeared. And all recent cases of diplomacy have been led by the global South or global majority, not by the West, and certainly not by NATO. The United Nations is crumbling under its ineffectiveness from years of neglect, underfunding, out-of-date structures, including the permanent 5 Security Council members and their power of the veto, accompanied by threats from these countries against anyone who steps out of line. Trust is at an all-time low between adversaries, spurred by broken NATO promises, US attacks during negotiations, and covert operations. It is high past time that we return to common security, though we must emphasize that the common security can no longer exist as long as NATO does. As a military alliance comprising over half of global military spending and constantly threatening to impose its will on the world's people cannot create security of any kind. For this reason, my organization, the International Peace Bureau, has worked closely with the International Trade Union Confederation, the ITUC, and the Olof Palme International Center to revitalize the concept of common security for the 21st century. We start with 6 key principles that guide our work. First, that all people have the right to human security, freedom from fear and freedom from want. Second, that building trust between nations and peoples is fundamental to peaceful and sustainable human existence. Third, that there can be no common security without nuclear disarmament, strong limitations on conventional weapons, and reduced military expenditure. Fourth, that global and regional cooperation, multilateralism, and the rule of law are crucial to tackling many of the world's challenges. Fifth, that dialogue, conflict prevention, and confidence-building measures must replace aggression and military force as the means of resolving disputes. And sixth, that better regulation, international law, and responsible governance also need to be extended to cover new military technologies, such as the realms of cyberspace, outer space, and artificial intelligence. We also see a series of recommendations, including overcoming military alliances in favor of security for all. We have further integrated the realities of today, including cross-border challenges that face us all, such as climate change and environmental degradation, as well as economic, gender, and racial inequalities, as issues that cannot be solved within the borders of any one nation, and that we need to cooperate globally in order to resolve. After all, the solutions to the problems of today will not be solved through military means, but only through global cooperation, trust, and understanding that none of us are secure until we are all secure. As we gather today to say no to NATO, let us acknowledge that we have a monumental task ahead of us. Common security thinking helped us to move back from the brink during the Cold War. Unfortunately, that project was not completed as NATO continued on into the 21st century. In bringing back the lessons of the past, we must acknowledge that the same mistakes must not be made again. Abolish NATO for true security for all. Thank you.
Yeah, here, thanks to Sean Conner for sending the video to us. He briefly mentioned the history and the presence of NATO and an alternative concept, common security. And yeah, Turkey hosting the NATO summit this year, and it stands in a critical point in geopolitics, also energy lines. So for the second speaker, I would like to invite Ana Sanchez from Global Energy Embargo for Palestine. She will talk about energy as a weapon, energy imperialism, and the fossil fuel industry as an integral part of industrial military complex. Please, Ana, we are with you. Thank you.
Hi, hello everybody, and thank you so much for organizing this and for inviting us to be part of this. I would like to share with all of you something that a Palestinian friend of mine recently told me, and it's something that really stayed with me. She said that children in Gaza no longer produce tears when they cry because their bodies are so dehydrated that they can't even shed tears when crying. And to me, that was like a horrible and awful illustration of how a genocide looks like. So far, more than 80,000 Palestinians have been killed in the past 2 years. Some researchers defend that this number can go up to more than 600,000 people if we count all of those who died because of hunger, because of lack of healthcare, or are still under the rubble. Israel has destroyed absolutely everything that sustains life in Gaza and has been trying to do so in all Palestinian lands for almost 8 decades already, on this ongoing Nakba, on this ongoing regime of settler colonialism, illegal occupation, apartheid, genocide, and ecocide as well. During the last 2 years, also over 100,000 tons of bombs dropped over Gaza with a carbon footprint greater than the annual emissions of many countries. This is absolutely unacceptable. And yet, while all this happens, the fossil fuels that are sustaining this are being traded, insured, and weaponized through systems of war, occupation, and colonial power. And the world keeps on moving on, doing business as usual, allowing these two deadly industries, the fossil fuel industry and the military industry, to keep on doing their business as usual, allowing energy to be used as a tool of oppression. And this is obviously a shame, but it is also not a surprise. Colonial and patriarchal systems have always organized who gets to extract, who gets to consume, and who bears the cost of all this. We all know that energy is not a neutral infrastructure. It is a political instrument that is being systematically used as a tool of oppression. The International Court of Justice has declared the occupation illegal, apartheid a crime against humanity, and they have even said that there was a genocide that was plausible, where we all know that it is happening. And those fundings carry legal obligations for third states. And yet, as I said before, the fossil fuels flow continue classified and certified and definitely unaccountable. And there is something that is quite obvious as well, and is that Israel cannot sustain all this alone. They need partners on these flagrant crimes. They need people and states to support with diplomatical coverage, with economic trade agreements, and they definitely need military and energy support. They need an existing commercial architecture that exists and is in place, and it functions as the backbone of all this structure of oppression. In terms of energy, Israel needs the crude oil that is coming from Azerbaijan and from Kazakhstan, coming through the BTC pipeline, which, as probably most of you know, is standing in Turkey, is operated by BP and SOCAR. And then all this crude oil is being shipped by Greek operators in hidden and ghost vessels that allows Israel to fulfill their needs in terms of crude oil. It also needs all the military jet fuel that is provided by their criminal partner, the US, also transported by sea through US maritime systems and military vessels that dock in several ports along the way, including ports in my own city and region, the port of Algeciras, despite the declarations of the Spanish government in support of the Palestinian people. They need also coal coming from South Africa that is powering the settlements in occupied Palestinian lands. Almost 90% of the coal that is reaching Israel nowadays is coming from South Africa, a country that fights apartheid and is really aware of these structures of oppression, is today fueling the illegal occupation of Palestine and the settler colonial Israel that is oppressing the Palestinian people, coming through the Richard Bay coal terminal with Glencore as one of the corporations profiting from these war crimes. Also, the profits that are coming from gas exports contribute to support these Israeli crimes. Stolen gas from Palestinian waters transported through the East Mediterranean pipeline crossing Palestinian maritime zones without, of course, Palestinian consent is feeding the European markets. Under a 2022 EU-Egypt-Israel Memorandum of Understanding that was renewed again in 2025 in the midst of the genocide, with Chevron and Snam's Italian corporation as operators profiting again from these crimes against humanity. All this is the architecture in place, the companies that are profiting from this, a very clear and identified routes, and all these are sharing the criminal complicity of an ongoing genocide. Francesca Albanese announced it in one of her latest reports that 80 countries are helping and supporting the ongoing genocide of against the Palestinian people, and probably the list of corporations are way longer. And the industry of the fossil fuel and the military industry are the main pillars of this system of massive destruction and oppression. And all the international regulatory frameworks that are now regulating all this, when we ask ourselves, where is international law? Why there is no accountability? Why there are no mechanisms that can prevent all this from happening? The response is that there is a big problem, and that these systems were built by and for the states that are profiting and benefiting from these flows. So the question of who controls energy and at whose expense was never meant to be answered in favor of occupied, colonized, or besides peoples. So energy is used as a tool of oppression in many directions. It is cut off from civilian populations as collective punishments, that we have seen very clearly in Gaza, but also in Cuba for decades. And it is also obviously deployed to fuel wars and genocides. The same barrel, the same pipeline can sustain life or can or can destroy, depending on who holds power over it. And we should reject this framework. So if fossil fuels can have this dual function, if they can kill or sustain life, why are we not regulating them as such, as dual-use items? We have the regulatory framework. We don't lack the tools. We have dual-use frameworks. We have export control law. We have the Arms Trade Treaty. We have international articles on state responsibility. What we are lacking here is political will to extend those frameworks to fossil fuels, because doing so will implicate that the states, again, that are currently benefiting and profiting from this gap will stop doing so. It will imply putting people over profit. So we believe that we need to defend energy sovereignty as a human right and as something that is a prerequisite from self-determination. Where energy sovereignty is denied, a transition cannot be just. Any framework that assumes that peoples hold sovereignty over their own resources while ignoring occupied and colonized population is a fiction that serves the powerful, denying people's right to self-determination. So we need to insist on that and make sure that energy sovereignty is recognized within people's right to self-determination. We also need a clear legal criteria distinguishing legitimate embargoes from collective punishment. So the denial of energy to civilian population can be named and can be prosecuted for what it is. And we also need a clear framework that can determine when energy embargoes should be automatically imposed on those states that are using energy to sustain flagrant human rights violations, as is the case in Palestine. Fossil fuels kill. That is clear. They are destroying our planet. They are the backbone of the military industry. So we need them to be classified as dual-use items, and we need mandatory due diligence, end-use certification, and full publicly accessible supply chains transparency. Because now those who are observing, those who are disrupting the supply chain are oil workers, local communities, and dock workers across different geographies that are trying to disrupt and to block the supply chains of the genocide. And we need urgent legal protection for concession objection workers that are already acting. Dock workers across the Mediterranean Sea, Brazilian oil workers, Colombian and South African mining communities, and so many other people at the front lines are doing today what international law says that states are obliged to do, which is refusing to aid war crimes and crimes against humanity. And they are doing that with their hands, with their bodies, without any legal protection, many often at personal cost. This is a class issue as well. This is a feminist issue of care. This is a labor issue, a human rights issue, and it is a matter of life or death. And we are now at a breaking point. The decades-long regime of settler colonialism, illegal occupation, and apartheid and genocide is causing unbearable suffering at every single level. And I personally believe that it will not last forever. The system of ongoing oppression and dispossession is powered by an imperial, patriarchal, fossil fuel, and blood-soaked capitalism that is already collapsing, is already taking its last gaps. And our movement is energized by people's power, by the power of joy and hope, and there is no putting out, and there is nothing putting out those flames. We will keep on fighting so that all Palestinian people can cry rivers of tears, of joy to celebrate their liberation. No arms, no energy, no harbors for genocide, free Palestine.
Thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, Turkey is Erdogan is actually famous for his pro-Palestine stance in international politics, but yes, you also mentioned in the region the shadow fleet that is fueling Israel in genocide in Gaza is also coming through Turkish ports, and yeah, despite all the rhetorics, Turkey is still one of the big partners of Israel in its trade relations. And thank you for putting out the relationship, especially between fossil fuels and militarization. And since she's here with us, if we have any questions, we can take them. It was very inspiring. Okay. Is there anything else would you like to add, Anna, about that? Or it looks like we have no questions, but
I think that's it. Also thank you and acknowledge the efforts that you are taking, acknowledging, as I say, the risk of all the land and environmental defenders, so the people that are denouncing the genocide against the Palestinian people and the cynical discourse of their governments in context of high repression as yours. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to discuss this and to visualize all these important matters. So just thank you.
Yeah, thank you too for being us with here. It's really encouraging and strengthening. And also, yeah, as you know, we actually planned the Saturday, the 4th of July, as Palestine Solidarity Day, but due to the restrictions, we couldn't do it. But we postponed it. We will still do it just a week after the NATO summit ends, and with more relaxed situation in Ankara. We are still doing the physical coming together and demonstrations. We hope so. I think Kudusi has a question. Kudusi, please.
Herkese merhaba. Ben şunu söylemek istiyorum ve sormak istiyorum. Biliyoruz ki savaşlar politikanın başka araçlarla devamı ve politika ekonominin birleşmiş halidir. Ve bizler kapitalizme karşı bir alternatif yaratamadığımız sürece savaşlara ve ekolojik tahribata son veremeyiz diye düşünüyorum. Sadece ABD ve NATO karşıtlığı ile savaşlar, sömürü ve çevre katliamı önlenemez diye düşünüyorum. Bunlardan neden hiç söz edilmiyor? Elbette ki sistemin sunduğu olanakları kullanalım. Ama bir yandan da gerçek çıkış yolunu tartışmamız gerekmiyor mu? Kapitalizme karşı bu işlerin sorumlusu kapitalizm olduğuna göre kapitalizme karşı alternatifler aramamız, bu alternatifler üzerinde tartışmamızı da öneriyorum. Teşekkür ederim.
Sana teşekkürler Kudüs. Evet, dediği şey önemli. Bu çok parçalı olduğu kadar aslında bir yandan birçok mücadele alanının bir araya geldiği bir şey. İklim mücadelesi de böyle, savaş karşı mücadele de böyle. Filistin'den NATO'ya, ABD'den Çin'e kadar dünya global olarak artan bir militarizmle karşıyayız. Evet, ve diğer hareketleri de burada birleşmek önemli diye düşünüyorum. Çok teşekkürler. Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, now we are with Deborah Burton. She's with us from Think Point North South, and she is working on military reports. She will mention more, and she will provide us more information about militarization, NATO expansion, and the current situation in the world. Thank you, Deborah. We are with you.
Thank you, Sezgin. Greetings to everybody. Thank you, Anna. And also thank you to Sean, although he's not here, because that was an excellent introduction to the history of NATO, how it's evolved and where we are now. So this peace summit, this No to NATO summit, is also coming, as we all know, in advance of COP31, which will be held in Antalya. And to link these two things together, I think the first thing we need to say is that as we move towards COP31, these never-ending wars, the impact of war on our climate and environment, and these insane levels of public finance that are going into military budgets and not on climate finance, all these issues will be present in Antalya. They will be present. And today's No to NATO event, it reinforces this message that COP31 needs to get its priorities right. We have had enough of trillions annually spent on war machines. We need to deliver what people all over the world are crying out for, which is investment to address every aspect of the climate emergency so that the needs of people and planet can be met. And until really just a few years ago, the role of the big fossil fuel reliant militaries on our climate was entirely unaddressed at COP climate meetings. Given that fossil fuels are the lifeblood of the modern military, it was absolutely an elephant in the emissions room. But what we know now is this, just to give you a little bit of background, that the global military and their supply chain are arms industries, they account together for around 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This is larger than Russia's annual carbon footprint. It is larger than the 54 nations of the African continent combined. It is twice as much as civilian aviation. And the critical thing to remember, and it is to sort of state the obvious, is that military spending is linked to emissions. So the more you spend on fossil fuel reliant hardware, we've heard Anna, the jets, the tanks, the warships, the bombs, the missiles, these are all fossil fuel reliant, the more you emit. So as Sean mentioned previously, global military spending has risen. It's risen by $1 trillion in the past decade. In 2025, it was just short of $3 trillion. 85% of that, the vast majority, accrues to the top 20 military spenders. And as Sean said, more than half of that $3 trillion, 1.6 trillion, accrues to NATO countries. The USA alone accounts for 1/3. Russia and Germany have both doubled their military spending in the past 10 years. And it goes without saying, China does not want to be left behind. Sorry, I've got a bit of a problem here with my screen. Can you see that? Okay. China doesn't want to be left behind, and it too has increased its spending. So China's spending is now 1/3 that of the USA. It's approximately 12% of world spending. So if this trend continues globally, in the next 4 years, between now and 2030, we can expect to see at least $15 trillion spent on the global military, around 55% of which will be spent by these rich countries, many of whom are in NATO. So to come to NATO specifically, and Sean's introduction really was excellent. When the Berlin Wall fell and Mikhail Gorbachev allowed an entire empire to collapse without a shot being fired, promises were made and broken that NATO would not take advantage of this seismic shift in European geopolitics and expand its membership. If you fast forward to today, NATO has 32 member countries, 30 in the European Union area, 2 in the North America, Canada, and the USA. And along the way, along that journey, 2 requests were made by Russia to join NATO, once in 1954 and again in 2001, and both were rejected. Today, the majority of NATO and EU member states are increasing their military spending enormously, and they are doing so at the expense of public funds for climate, overseas aid, and public services at home. And Donald Trump's threats to cut USA contributions to NATO has successfully and conveniently given EU NATO members the pretext to hike their military spending. So previously, the target was set at 2% of GDP for NATO members to be spent on the military. That's significant enough. NATO's 32 members now are aiming for 3.5% of GDP, rising to 5% of GDP by 2035. NATO's new intended 3.5% spending goal will lead to, over the next 4 years, this is what it would cost, a $2.6 trillion increase. 4 years. This figure could cover nearly 3 years' worth of climate finance needs of developing countries at $1 trillion a year, or it could pay outright for the world's global electricity grid to be made net zero compatible by 2030. And the climate cost is equally bad. If every NATO member state hits the 3.5% of GDP spending target every year, commencing 2015, by 2030, NATO's military carbon footprint would be comparable with the combined annual greenhouse gas emissions of Brazil and Japan. And this is the other thing. NATO's ever-rising military spending is at risk, if it hasn't already, triggered a global arms race with all the attendant emissions and lost social and climate investment. NATO's 3.5% goal has also intentionally pulled its Pacific allies to follow suit. So South Korea, Australia, and Japan. And Trump has called for Taiwan to increase military spending to 10% of its GDP. And so the big question we have to ask is, what about China? Because if China adopted the same goal, and you could say, why wouldn't it? It would immediately double China's current annual military expenditure to $646 billion. And that will have massive impact on military emissions, diversion from climate and social investment. At the moment, NATO collectively spends nearly 5 times as much as China does on its military. NATO members also have nearly 1,000 overseas military bases. The vast majority of them are American, 800 or so. And many of these bases surround China. And by contrast, China has 1 overseas base in Djibouti. And linked to all of this is arms production, because arms production is now being seen as the new economic growth driver. This is as a result of the war in Ukraine, genocide on Palestinian people, and the war in Iran. It is a misguided, immoral, short-term fix, and it will not deliver what some governments expect it to deliver. But it will surely boost ever more the profits of military contractors. And the car industry is seemingly key to this. Volkswagen is in advanced talks with Israeli defense firm Rafael to repurpose its Osnabrück plant in Germany to build missile defense components. VW has ruled out producing the weapons themselves, but the factory could manufacture heavy-duty military trucks, launchers, and generators for systems like the Iron Dome. German arms maker Rheinmetall is looking to use the same Volkswagen factory to make armored vehicles. The Audi production facility in Brussels could undergo a similar transformation. Italy's industry minister has proposed converting car factories to defense production due to the auto industry crisis. And finally, in the US, General Motors is in talks with Lockheed Martin about making parts for the defense contractors' weapons and would manufacture commonly used parts to help bolster Lockheed Martin's munitions production. And Sean also talked about this. This military buildup also includes nuclear weaponry. As NATO nations upgrade their weapons, their nuclear weapons, we are seeing press stories about the possibility of, quote, small and limited tactical nuclear exchanges. These stories are published from time to time. Small and limited is pure fantasy. Any kind of nuclear weapons use is devastating, and any detonation, no matter how reduced the yield, risks immediate and uncontrollable escalation. And as if the normalization of limited nuclear war isn't insane enough, there is regular, loose, and irresponsible talk in Europe about World War III. The truth is that the consequence of talking World War III into being is not being taken seriously enough by our decision makers. Last year, the French government made plans to send a survival manual to every household in the country with instructions on how to prepare for an imminent threat, included armed conflict, health, natural disaster. But it came after Macron urged France and Europe to prepare to confront the Russian threat. German military leadership considers war with Russia likely. The Lieutenant General Christian Freuding, the guy who's head of the German army, just said in June, just in June, quote, 2029 is not a German timeline. It's a NATO-agreed intelligence. All 32 NATO partners agree that Russia might have the capability to invade a NATO partner country in 2029. Might. And in the UK, 53% of Britons think that World War III is likely within the next 5 to 10 years. Richard Sheriff, who's the former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of NATO in Europe, British guy, has warned that future historians will look back on the US-Israel conflict with Iran as the final catalyst for a third world war. Either we are being gaslit or they know something. Wherever the truth lies, we citizens, we cannot let this rhetoric become reality. And while NATO leaders talk about World War III, there is another war that has been declared, and it's a war they know is real. And it is the war declared on our planet by the rich and powerful forces, big oil, big finance, corporate captured governments, corporate media, now being joined by the big tech oligarchs. Because as long as they can kick that climate can down the road, they will, all the time taking the oil subsidies, the banking bonuses, the arms industry profits, and evading taxes. In 2025, scientists from the Planetary Boundaries Science Lab at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, they conducted a new assessment of something they call the 9 planetary boundaries that make up Earth's life support systems. Their assessment found that 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries have been transgressed. They suggest that Earth is now well outside the safe operating space for humanity. 3/4 of Earth's support systems are not in a safe zone. And I just want to read a few sentences from Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, who spoke at London Climate Week last week. He said, 10 years ago, world leaders agreed in Paris to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Scientists are now saying that average annual temperatures will exceed that threshold in the coming years. The task before us is to strictly limit the overshoot, shorten its duration, and bring temperatures down below 1.5 degrees Celsius as fast as possible. Every fraction of a degree matters, because the higher and longer the overshoot, the greater the risk of crossing planetary tipping points that trigger irreversible change. Every fraction of a degree matters. NATO's policy of 3.5 degrees of GDP rising to 5% of GDP on military spending is a clear, shameless rejection of the effort to keep within 1.5 degrees of warming, and it can be seen no other way. And unfortunately, where NATO goes, especially the USA, others follow. What makes it so hard to take, this NATO trajectory, is that NATO itself knows where this is heading. NATO is currently pending observer membership of the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change. The IPCC is the gold standard of climate science. NATO is pending membership status, observer status. NATO, and this is, I quote from their website, NATO says it supports dedicated climate science through the Science for Peace and Security program and the NATO Science Technology Organization. And it maps how rising temperatures impact military readiness and infrastructure. They know what we all know. They know our planet is on life support. But as we cross 7 of those planetary boundaries, nations, many of them EU, NATO member nations, the US is a NATO member, they are choosing to commit wars of aggression, perpetrating genocide, committing ecocide in their wake, and traumatizing entire populations for generations to come, because war and the war economy is the priority. As Arundhati Roy said, once weapons were manufactured to fight wars, now wars are manufactured to sell weapons. Arms company profits are booming, and they are shameless in their pursuit of those profits. And yet, the UN's SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals face a staggering $4 trillion annual financing shortage. There is a minimum US $2 trillion funding gap for the climate and energy transition. So can we afford to pay for our human needs? Yes, we surely can. Remember that $3 trillion a year spent on the military. This is a crisis of priorities, not resources. Reducing military expenditure is one of the most significant and most politically avoided levers available to finance a global just transition away from fossil fuels. Okay, to just briefly wrap up. Martin Luther King said that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And of course, he is right. We know he is right. It does and it will, but this time it is a race against the clock that we must win. We do not want a world war triggered with Russia, China, or any other nation on Earth. We want to stop the 6th mass extinction, the permafrost from melting, the coral reefs from disappearing, and the ocean from boiling. We want to stay within 1.5 degrees limit. We do not want a terrifying 2 degrees of warming or more. Instead, we need to leave behind the geopolitics of 19th and mid-20th centuries. Ordinary people all over the world are in the fight of their lives to save their home planet and their livelihoods. We have no choice to come together, but to come together. NATO belongs to another era. We need a transformational shift in foreign policy, in international relations. Climate change does not recognize borders. NATO's deepening militarization and expansion is pursued at the expense of climate stability, of international development, of climate finance, and long-term global resilience. The choice is clear for NATO. They can double down on their arms race with all the massive risks that come with that, or they can do the right thing, look differently at your world in this 21st century, and prioritize investment in a safer, cleaner, and more sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Like we also see in Turkey before the NATO summit where the money will be spent. I think that's an important issue also in Bonn, SB 64. We also observed that governments are looking for people are looking for climate finance, but the governments decide to spend it on militarization. Also in Turkey, right now they just opened in Ankara, for example, a new airport. It's only for the use of the NATO leaders who will visit Ankara, and it won't be public. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining the first session of today. We will take some questions if we have some, but we are planning to have a 15-minute break before starting the second session at 4. Now I see Tuğçe. Please go on, and we will continue. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. As I wrote in the chat, maybe you couldn't see, I was wondering if your organizations have also reports on peacetime ecological and humanitarian destruction too. I wrote it while there was this presentation from Anna on Palestine, because I think that we have to mention also that part, that period, like not only the conflicts. Thank you.
Shall I respond on that? Just like for Palestine, just like we cannot talk about any peacetime in Palestine since the creation of Israel. So we could not describe any situation as peaceful since all the colonial regime started. There are some reports on the environmental devastation that actually was created with the creation of Israel, and how this whole colonial regime changed the landscape, changed the indigenous ecosystems, leading to environmental destruction. And also several reports that maybe I can share them with Sakhin and then can share with the rest of you, documenting the systematic destruction of energy, like community-based energy infrastructures, a lot of them funded with public money from the EU and other states. But yeah, there is like documentation not only from the last intensification of the genocide of the last 2 years, but there is reports and documentation on the environmental devastation created and enforced by Israel from its very origins. And yeah, I can find some links and share them later if you're interested, definitely.
Mhm. Yes, thank you so much.
put it-
Also, Deborah shared another reference in chat. Deborah, were you about to say something? Sorry. Okay.
No, yeah, I just put one link there to one report that addresses all of that. You're absolutely right. It is what's going on in peacetime as well as war. And I just put a generic link there. We've got quite a lot of work reports and briefings, and so have a look. Thank you.
Yes, could you see, please? Yeah, but yeah, please keep it short, and yeah, we can have a break. Thank you.
Evet, çok kısa tutacağım. Biraz önceki sorduğum soruya konuşmacıların da cevap vermelerini istiyordum. Teşekkürler.
Burada olmasa da bir sonraki şeyde de belki alabiliriz. Tuğçe buyur.
No, I wonder if you heard the translation in English or not. No. So the first time that when Kudisi asked the question, it was about the anti-capitalist perspective of this struggle. So he was wondering, what are your opinions and maybe we can say solutions or like common strategies for that. Thank you.
I mean, to me, of course, like, yes, it is, we have to propose alternatives to capitalism because it's one of the pillars that is supporting all these structures of oppression, not only in Palestine, but globally, as you said. And it's the system that puts profits over people. And I think from all the different struggles, the climate, the anti-militarists, anti-racist, Palestinian solidarity movement, we need to bring together and identify what are the pillars that are coming across the different struggles. And definitely the current capitalist system that is, again, like deeply connected with all the fossil fuel industry and the military industry. I think they're all the same kind of power oppressing people at a global scale is the root of all these problems. So to me, like, of course, this is also an anti-capitalist struggle and bringing alternatives that are community-based, social economy, an energy system that is based on cooperatives of energy creation based on solar energy and more like renewable energies that are not connected to all the fossil fuel industry that can and are able to also redistribute the power because also transitioning away to other renewable energy system that again is following the same logic of the fossil fuel and the capitalist industry that again is putting profits over people without ignoring and acknowledging that all the resources that we are extracting from the earth are common goods, are not and not commodities to be traded. We need to reshape all these structures and all these economies that are against life on its own.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anha again. Çiğdem, please.
Çok sağ olun. Türkçe konuşacağım. Umarım arkadaşlar çeviriyi alırlar. O yuvarlığa basıp. Peki. Şimdi 14-18'inde bütün bu konuşmacı arkadaşlarımızı Antalya'da birlikte olmaya davet ediyoruz. Şimdi oraya giderken de savaş karşıtlığı, barış ve halklar ekseninde ortak programlar inşa etmek gibi bir niyetimiz var. Bunu bir yandan yerel örgütlerimiz yüz yüze toplantılar yaparak Antalya'ya doğru bu eksendeki tartışmaları yerelleştirmeye, ulusal düzeyde desteklemeye ve uluslararası paydaşlarıyla buluşturmaya çalışıyoruz. 18-19'unda Ankara'da yüz yüze yapacağımız toplantıda yine uluslararası ölçekte işte bu savaş karşıtlığı ve halklar özellikle yerli halkların ekosistemlerini bu sisteme karşı savunma mücadelelerinde de destek istemeyi düşünüyoruz. Oraya da online katılım sağlayabilirsek çok seviniriz. Uluslararası ilişkiler bütün bu yerel barış buluşmalarını uluslararası perspektifle, uluslararası paydaşlarla buluşturmayı hedefliyor. 18-19'unda da belli bir program paylaştığımızda yani halkların yani yine Filistin'i konuşabiliriz, yine yerli halkların meselelerini konuşabiliriz. Türkiye'den çok ciddi soykırıma uğramış, göçe zorlanmış, asimilasyona zorlanmış çok sayıda halkların temsilcileriyle buluşacağız. Aynı zamanda uluslararası ölçekte kimlik, emek, kadın hareketi, hayvan hakları ve işte bütün bu toplumsal muhalefet odaklarının savaş karşıtlığı ve iklim adaleti mücadelesine ne tür katkıları olabileceğini e, sorduğumuz ve bu katkıları doğrudan yüz yüze aldığımız koza çalışmalarımızı da orada bir araya getirmeyi hedefliyoruz. 18-19'unda da buluşmak umuduyla diyeyim. Ben de katkımı kapattım, sustum.
Um,
The 18th and 19th will be hybrid, if I understood well.
yeah, so. Okay, we are. We have great timing. It's at the moment 3:45. So if that's okay for everyone, like if there is also no more discussion or questions, I offer to have a break for like 10 minutes, also for our translator friends, so that we can have a small rest. You can of course disconnect, connect again, or stay here, video close, whatever. So like. After 10 minutes, hope to see you at 5 to 4 in Turkish time. So in 10 minutes, yeah, hope to be with all of you here, with all the extra speakers in the second session of today's conference. Thank you.